Okay, the meeting is now being recorded.
Can you just man the waiting room, please, Kimber or
Yep,
Christy?
I
Okay.
can. No
All right. Thank
problem.
you. Good morning, Cedar.
Good morning, John. How are you today?
We're good. Thank you. Thanks for
Good.
being here.
Of course, I'm excited to be here.
You're lying.
No, I could talk about MAST all day. I'm sure some of the folks on the call, if they've seen our other trainings, can attest to.
All right. Very good. We'll give a few more minutes here for people to join us and then we'll move along.
Perfect. Sounds great.
Kimber, I'm sorry, Cedar, do you have a PowerPoint or, um,
Yep, I do. I'll go ahead and if I could share my screen, that would be great.
let's see if I can.
I just did that, John. I got
Okay.
it.
Thank
So,
you.
mhm.
Perfect. You should be able to see my screen now.
Peter, we still have quite a few people jumping in.
Okay, no problem. Just let me know when a good time to start is.
Okay.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Want to just, we'll wait a few more minutes as we got quite a few people wanting to attend today, so hang tight. We'll give it one more minute.
Um, are you loopy? No, what does that even mean? I just can't feel my mouth. And I literally sound weird. So, well,
Jenny, can
that
you
buddy,
mute?
hey, babe,
Jenny, can you
say
mute,
my
please?
mouth. Love you.
I got her.
Thank you. All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Wednesday. It's good to see everybody here. And it was good to see everybody yesterday who was able to attend the conference. So I appreciate everybody. Glad everybody was able to make it home safe and sound. And here we go with Wednesday. Danny is not going to be able to make it here with us today. She had a family issue come up, so not able to be here. But we're kind of back to where we started with me hosting these things for today. And we've invited Cedar Rose to join us today to at least talk about during the first half hour of our time together this morning, to talk a little bit about the MAST assessment and the overview of that whole process, the rollout of that, and how that's all going. Then at the end upon that, the conclusion of that, we can, the OPI team that was in Bozeman yesterday, myself, Kimber, and Christy are here in attendance, that we can possibly accept some question and answers if needed, and or are open to any kind of suggestions that you might have based upon what we had discussed, that overview yesterday, which was similar to the overview that we provided in previous conversations as well. So what I'll do is we'll just, this is being recorded for everybody, just for record keeping purposes and anybody who's not able to make it today. So I will hand this off to Cedar, and we'll go from there. Thank you for being here, Cedar.
Of course, thanks, John. So as John said, my name is Cedar Rose. I'm the State Assessment Director with the Office of Public Instruction. Good to see some familiar faces. Over the last, say, year and a half since I came here, one of our big initiatives that we've been focused on and preparing for is our MAST assessment. So today I'm going to present on MAST, where we came from, where we are now, and really tailor this presentation more towards you folks in special education, what your educators in the field are experiencing, how we can prepare students, those sort of things. I have this slideshow. I did send it over to Danny. It has links at the end. I'll make sure I get it to John as well. So any of the links that I discuss, any of the things you can go back, you can review. We have a ton of resources on MAST. I always joke that, I could really fill like days and days talking about math. So while I'll try to cover a lot that pertains to you, if there's any additional things that you have questions about, feel free to always reach out to myself or my team, because we know that any change is hard. Statewide assessment in itself is kind of a beast. And so as we're transitioning statewide assessments, I know there's a lot of questions with that. So we'll jump in. Feel free to use the chat for questions at any time. And then we'll do a little question and answer at the end. So my goal today is to present for about 25 minutes and then leave some space for questions. I'm not very great at checking the chat during, but if there's a question that comes up, throw it in the chat. John, if you want to monitor that and throw those towards me, that's great. And then we'll leave some space as well. Um, the structure of what we're going to look through today is just the assessment and the MAST overview. Like I said, how we got to this point, what's really driving this assessment forward, our theory of action. We're going to talk a little bit about inclusion best practice and more from the legal side. We've had a lot of questions about, our students on IEPs and their learning levels and what they need to be exposed to. So Danny helped support that conversation at our MAST Summit that we had a few weeks ago. So I stole some of her slides for this as well, just to give you some of those parameters of when we're looking at statewide assessment, what actually needs to be assessed when it comes to grade level content. We're going to talk about the accommodations guidance. I know there's been a lot of questions about the transition of IEPs and what those accommodations look like. So we've come up with this structure to help support this year of transition, while our IEPs may be referring to smarter balanced, even though we're administering MAST. And then I just want to give you all resources on accommodations, supports, and tools to help your educators feel comfortable, and at the end of the day, really make our students most comfortable, because this assessment model is all about serving students. So I know that many of you have heard about MAST many times, maybe from the inception. Really what started MAST was this theory of action that came together around the summer of 2022 that talks about like, what can assessment really be? And I know this is a wordy slide, so I'm just going to let you pause and read it. This is an excerpt from our MAST theory of action that really drove this process. I thought that this was a good way to sum up, why are we even doing this? So I'll give you a minute to read through that. Feel free in the chat to, if there's any words or phrases that resonate with you, feel free to drop those in the chat to be able to share. But I'll give you a minute of silence to read through why we embarked on MAST in the first place. Like I said, as you wrap up, if any words or phrases resonate more, feel free to share those in the chat. So for any assessment that we have, and it's 3 years especially, really 3 years can have two major goals. The first and foremost is annual determination. So we know it is federally and state required that we have to have a state assessment that has those annual determinations where we can compare across student groups, compare across schools. So that was formerly carried by Smarter Balance, our alternate assessment, that MSAA. But really, our goal in our MAST through year is to provide that instructional utility throughout the year. I was a sixth grade teacher for 10 years, and my biggest gripe with those end of year assessments were by the time I get the data, my kids have already passed on. I can't do anything with it. It's not useful data. So our main goal in MAST is to be able to provide data throughout the year in bite-sized pieces to really, intervene, meet students where they are instead of getting these score reports at the end of the year. They're like, well, that's great, but they're now seventh graders and I can't do anything. So August 2022 was, it was years ago at this point. And so as we move forward with any of our operations and any of our activities and rollouts, we really go back to this theory of action as our driving force behind what we're doing. So with that, this is our development of MAST. So that theory of action, getting our stakeholders together, educators together, was really in the 2022 year. We were a small scale pilot 2 years ago. We had about 5,000 students in 2 grade levels. We just wrapped our large scale field test. We ended up having over 30,000 students that participated in MAST statewide in that field test. So we didn't get those determinations coming out of last year. We had that federal waiver that was granted where our students who were in MAST didn't have to also take the Smarter Balanced assessment, which was really great because we were able to get phenomenal data from that field test and move us forward into our statewide assessment. Just for comparison, we usually test around 68,000 third through eighth graders. So having over 30,000 students, we had just under half of our state has already had exposure to MAST, which is great going into any sort of change that we already have almost half of that exposure. And then we are gearing up right now for our statewide assessment, which is really exciting. MAST will be our assessment for federal state accountability. We'll be reporting out those scores throughout our operational windows. Talk about score reports a little bit, and then we will have those proficiency levels after summer standard setting. Our long-term plan, just some things I want to highlight that are coming up. We are in the process of continuously looking at our pilot data right now. We're launching our interim reporting. We just finished scheduling for our districts. We'll talk about math alignment a little bit. But really the exciting thing about math is schools were able to go in and align what tests they were taking to their local scope and sequence per their grade level. So we just finished that last week, and we had every eligible district in the state finish their scheduling by that deadline. So phenomenal that we already have those schedules. Amazing data that we've never had before of what curriculum or scope and sequence our districts are using. So that was a big activity that we just wrapped. And then at the end of this year, we have to go a process called standard setting. So what standard setting is we bring together educators, stakeholders, about 100 folks together, and we go through and we determine those proficiency levels that we report out for our statewide assessments and then for our report cards as well. So a lot of people have already asked, well, how are our students doing compared to Smarter Balance to MAST? We decide those cut scores or those proficiency levels as a state through this process. So we will not have those comparisons until we finish that process in the summer of 2025. Looking at this year and where we are now. So we've had a lot of additional questions about, well, MAST is changing, but what else is changing? Nothing. The only assessment change we have for this upcoming year is MAST. So here you have our testing windows. Like I said, any of the documents that I have in here are linked, and I'll make sure you guys get this slideshow out to you. But MAST is administered in 4 windows throughout the entire year. So we start our first testing window October, and then we test October, November, January, February, March to May, and then we have a short little wrap-up test that I'll talk about here in a second. Everything else that we have administered in the past, our access for ELLs, our Montana Science Assessment, all remain the same. So that means that your students who are eligible for the alternate assessment, MSAA for math and ELA, will continue to take that in that summative version. We'll talk about uploads and those sort of things, but if you have a student who has that alt eligibility, they will not be taking MAST. We're making sure that those students don't get into that testing portal. It could happen, but just a continuous awareness of now that we don't have those overlapping windows in that summative style, make sure that you and your educators are well aware of those students that should be taking that alt assessment. They will still be in MSAA, while our students who are in that general population will be taking MAST starting in October. Here are our overview of our windows. So like I said, very different cadence for assessment than we've had in the past. We are starting to test October 14th, and that first window wraps up just before Thanksgiving with November 22nd. Each one of our main windows is 6 weeks long. We've talked a lot with our educational leaders about how we should be administering MAST to our students. So while we have some of our habits that are ingrained from our summative assessments, where maybe you wait till the very, very last week of the window and you try to test all of your kiddos and get all your testlets wrapped up, we are really encouraging districts and teachers to assess students throughout that window. So since we have a closer alignment to what's being instructed and what's being assessed, you could have a teacher who comes in who is already giving instruction at this time. Maybe they finish a unit, and day one of the testing window, they can go in and they can assess on the skills that they've already taught to their students. And they have one testlet out of the way. As they continue to teach, they can take another testlet. And as they continue to teach, they can take a final testlet. For each one of our windows, depending on that local scope and sequence that districts have submitted, they're taking between 3 and 5 testlets. Some districts are down to 2, depending on, where they were at that first window. But you can expect students to take anywhere from 3 to 5 testlets in math, and then 2 testlets for ELA. Each one of those windows, there's a literary and an informational testlet for those. And then we also have a performance task in window 2. And we put that in window 2 so we were able to, those are hand scored, so teachers can get the feedback from those. For our students who, may have a little bit different pacing when it comes to their curriculum, I wanna note that students in the same grade don't have to take testlets on the same day. So if you have a student who needs a little extra time to master that, they can go ahead. They don't have to take it at that same time. Maybe they're going a little bit out of order within those windows. Absolutely, you can be able to individualize that. We do have a pause feature. We'll talk about timing a little bit. So if a student is, testing, if they come to the end of that class period, you can pause and resume the next day. There's a feature within our administration portal to be able to do that. But any testlet that's assigned during that window has to be completed during that window. Really quickly want to touch on this window 4, which is our anchor testlet. So we did a lot of stakeholder feedback and educator feedback last year. And one thing that our teachers really asked is, during our windows, we want these testlets as small as possible so we can administer in a short period of time. And looking at our test timing, administration for a testlet is really anywhere between 10 and 30 minutes. So when we're thinking about, administering a testlet, you can do that well within a classroom. So to make sure that those testlets were as small as possible in those 3 major windows, any of our field testing or any of the other things that we have to do for the health of an assessment, some of our research things, some of our equating, we put those all into this last window for this coming year. So when we get to that anchor window, that anchor testlet, a student will get 1 out of 4 potential things. They might get some math field testing questions, ELA field test, a performance test field test, or they may have a math form that's a review of the entire year. That anchor test does not contribute to the summative score, but it is still part of the administration. A student will only get 1 of those things, and all of the students within a classroom will get the same testlet. So you're not trying to manage, an ELA testlet and a math testlet in the same time. So just know that there is that short testlet, about 15 to 30 minutes at the end of the year, that will be administered in that final window. This is just a breakdown of those testlets by our windows. So like I said, ELA, there are 7 testlets throughout the year, 2 beginning of the year, 2 middle of the year, 2 end of the year, literary and informational and that performance task in window 2. Those were set scheduling. Teacher or school administrators did not have to go in and schedule any of those. That is the same alignment for everyone across the state. The thing that changes from window to window is the depth of complexity of the passages that students are seeing. So you're really able to see how students are progressing throughout the year with that. Math, those 12 testlets are aligned at the local level. That has already been done. And teachers were able to see very clearly what's expected to be administered in each one of those windows, but all 12 of those have to be administered throughout the course of the year, and they have to be within the testing window that they've assigned to. Overview of those ELA testlets. Really excited about that writing performance task in window 2. This summer, we brought together some educators from across the state to create the parameters for scoring those. Those are hand-scored performance tasks, and since we're administering those in window 2, educators are able to get the feedback back on those performance tasks so they can take that data and adjust their instruction accordingly. Like I said, the summative calculation is from all of the testlets administered through those first 3 windows. Here's those math, 12 testlets throughout the course of the year. Those testlets are independent, non-repeating standards. So if you look at those score reports, you'll be able to see which standards were assessed. We do not repeat those standards. That being said, as a former math teacher, and I'm sure as many of you are former math educators or current math educators, we know that a lot of those math concepts repeat or maybe go in depth. So really important that we're using those early score reports to understand, maybe my students are struggling with these concepts. We're going to address that, provide some additional instruction, and then fill in maybe some of those potential holes that we're seeing for those later testlets that could build on those early skills. Our testlet scheduling is already done. Those are locked in. We're really excited about that process being wrapped up. It does allow for specific curricula or custom scheduling. So we had a variety of ways that our district scheduled. Some of them, put in their curriculum and then just said, okay, we're going to cover these 3 in the first, these 4, and then these 5, and really follow that scope and sequence from a set curriculum. But districts and schools also have the ability to go and create a complete custom scope and sequence designed to what they are using. And schools are locked into their scheduling for the entire year. There is no changing at this point. They can go back after this year and adjust for next year. So if they see that they need to adjust things, we will open up that process every single year to allow for adjustments. And just this is what our schools have experienced. They finished their MAST scheduling. Right now they're working on the process of rostering and entering accommodations and supports, which I'm going to touch on. We're preparing student devices for testing. It's a secure browser, just like we've done with any of our other summative assessments. They're printing test tickets. And then we're also really encouraging students to be able to take technology tests, and I'll show you where to access that, because we know that the more comfortable our students feel, the more valid and reliable our assessment data is going to be. So just a few things about inclusion. Like I said, stole this slide from Danny. I've had a lot of questions about, students that have IEPs, and the question has come up, well, if I have a student that's working, 2 grade levels behind their peers, why are they taking this grade level assessment? Here are some of those regulations that Danny pulled for me, and from the federal assessment standpoint, students have to be assessed on grade level standards. Grade level standards were assessed with our Smarter Balance assessment. We really have to make sure that we are seeing where students are on grade level content. So when we think about that first one, we need to make sure that our students, regardless of where they are accessing our general curriculum so we can meet the educational standards. It's not being said we don't want to meet students where they are. I think it's really important to, if we have students who are working below grade level on some content, to meet them where they at, but we have to be giving exposure to grade level standards. As I'm not a special education teacher, that's not where my background is, and so I know that John and Danny can provide more support around that. But we have always assessed grade level standards, and we will continue to assess grade level standards on this statewide assessment. Going into accessibility, there's been a lot of work and continues to be a lot of work around accessibility, accommodations, and administration. A few things that are coming into play this year. Like I said, this is a big transition year. Depending on where schools were with MAST last year, pilot or not pilot, their IEPs may not be updated to have MAST direct accommodations or that language that reflect MAST accommodations. That is okay. We want to make sure that current IEPs are being used. If they are not updated to MAST, there is a MAST accessibility or accommodations and accessibility crosswalk that we have published. I'll make sure that link gets to you. And what it does is it breaks down every one of the accommodations or the supports that could be in an IEP that relate to Smarter Balance. And it shows this is what that accommodation or support would be in MAST. And it also says what type of support it would be. We're going to go into those different types of supports here in a bit. But we are really focused on the differentiation between accommodations, which are only for students with 504 IEPs, designated supports, which are available to all students demonstrated on need. And then MAST has a very robust universal support menu. And so universal supports are just things that are within the system, available to all the students. You don't have to set anything. And so we've noticed that there's a lot of tools that were designated as accommodations that you are setting in the IEP within Smarter Balance that now are just available. So when you go into that IEP editor and you have that MAST drop down for your state accommodations or state assessment accommodations, you will see that it's a much shorter, concise list. We only put those accommodations in there that have to be set that are based on IEPs and 504. You can go in and you can put additional designated supports in there, and we have a lot of universal features. But looking at that Smarter Balance list that we had in the past was very long, and I think it was confusing to say, what do each student population get? And so continue to use those updated 504s, IEPs, wherever they are. But as we go through this year, as you amend your IEPs or new IEPs are created, that drop down for the MAST accommodations are now in the IEP editor. So when you go in, just make sure that you are selecting that MAST drop down, and by this next year, all of our students will be updated to those MAST accommodations. PNP settings is actually in Kite, where Kite is our platform for MAST, where you will put those accommodations. Since we are testing throughout the course of the year, just really important that you're going in, that you're updating those IEP or those PNP settings as accommodations change. And then we'll talk a little bit about also entering accommodations in the Kite settings, and that can only be done by building in district level personnel, depending on your role. So teachers cannot go in and adjust accommodations and supports in Kite. That has to be done by a building or a district level role within that system. Just a review of our 3 tiers of accessibility, and this really speaks to what you're going to be seeing in the IEP editor and also in the Kite PNP settings. Those universal features, we have a very robust menu of those for our students to be able to use. Calculator, digital notepad highlighter. In the past, those universal features you also selected in the IEP editor. Anything that's available to anyone, you don't have to go in and select now within that IEP process. Designated features, those are available to any of our students who are demonstrating a need. So our English language learners, maybe some of our students who aren't necessarily on a 504 IEP, but have some extra supports in the classroom. So those are like translated test directions, separate setting, any of those things that, like I said, are available to everyone, but we want to make sure that those are only being used for those students who are demonstrating a need. And then that top tier of accommodations are only for students that have those 504s or IEPs. So we talk about like closed captioning, scribe, read aloud, any of those things that you can only set if the student has a 504 and an IEP. And we also have embedded and non-embedded. And what we do in the Kite platform is we make it very clear what's going to be within the system that a student can use, and then what's going to be outside. So if you're a test administrator, you're going to want to double check, do I have those right embedded supports? Is a student going to have those when they're actually taking a test? And then those non-embedded, what are some things outside of the platform that as a test administrator am I going to need to do? So we talk about like separate setting, maybe medical supports, noise buffers, Braille forms, scribes, paper forms, any of those things. So when we get into this is what the accommodations or the PNP settings looks like in the Kite platform. Some of you may be going in and setting these on behalf of your school or your district. This directly mirrors the structure that we have as a state for those accommodations. So in our PNP settings, this is where you would set your accommodation. So only for students who have 504 IEPs, You would go in based on what are in those educational plans, and you would toggle off and on the embedded supports, so sign language, open captioning. You would go in and toggle those on and off, and those would trigger in the platform what will be changed. Any of these non-embedded things are things that a test administrator would need to be able to provide or something outside of the system. As I've noted up here, district and school level users are the only ones who can edit those accommodations. So a teacher can't go in and turn on accommodations unless they have a building or a district level user role. We also have this description toggle off and on. So as we're going through these first rounds of entering accommodations, it's nice to see those descriptions. As we get smoother with it, it's a quick go in, double check. And if we need to turn additional things on based on IEP 504 changes, you can absolutely do that from window to window. Here's that designated supports. So once again, only district and school level users are able to turn those off and on. These are more of our display choices. So like our color contrast, color overlay, any of those things. Some of those non-embedded are for, our English language learners, maybe a bilingual dictionary. Maybe we have some other things that are going on outside of the system, some separate setting, those sort of things. So said any student can use those designated supports as long as they are using those in their day-to-day educational experience. And then on the Universal Features tab, this is just showing everything we have. You don't have to turn anything off and on for this because every single student has these available when they enter the platform. And then what's really important is the summary page. So we have been in talking with our teachers, those folks who are directly going to administer MAST to students. They can go in, and while they won't be able to change accommodations or designated supports, before they test, they can go in and they can double check that those are entered properly. So if you're going in and ready to administer to the student, you're going to see all the things that are embedded that they're going to have within the system, and then those non-embedded sections as well. So if I was a test administrator, I would know that, okay, the student has alternate response options and they also have a separate setting. So we're really focusing on not just making sure those people who are entering those accommodations and designated supports are aware, but those people who are administering the testlets also do a double check. One of our biggest test security violations that we have is incorrect entered accommodations or incorrect provided accommodations. So we really want to make sure that every student is getting the proper accommodation based on their needs and their educational plans. Just a few tips that we've been sharing about ensuring students are comfortable. So we want to make sure that our students can get into that practice test prior to testing. And that's especially true for those students who may need a little additional support, who get anxious around testing. So there is a publicly available kite practice test. It's based on the technology, not the questions at this point. But students can get in, be able to access that, play around with all of the tools that are available before they get into that testing environment. And I'll show you what that looks like and how you can access that with your students. Other thing is, once again, making sure that students are receiving those proper accommodations prior to test date, and then double checking to making sure that all of those match before administration. Our guidance is those accommodations should be entered by around September 30th. That being said, we know we're going to have new students, some things that change, but we know a lot of our districts are well on the way to entering those accommodations, knowing that if an accommodation is not entered by the September 30th, it will still be caught if it's entered before that testing. We really want to make sure that before testing day that those accommodations are entered and double checked, because some of those accommodations take a little bit of a time to catch once they've been entered. So make sure those accommodations are correct before we start testing. And then just making sure that administration, the actual setting of where those students are testing is according to the IEP or the 504 accommodations, and then mirror as closely as possible the regular assessment environment for that student. We've talked to some folks who say we have a huge population of students who are taking tests in a separate setting. And that's really hard when it comes to our statewide assessments because we're pulling in for those classrooms. And we've started to have some discussions about, well, where are these students taking their classroom assessments? And for a large majority of students, we have students who are taking their unit unit tests in their classroom, quizzes in their classroom. But when it comes to statewide assessment, we're now pulling them off into a separate setting. So with any of the supports that we're providing students with statewide assessment, we want it to mirror what they're experiencing on a daily basis. So a student is testing with their peers throughout the year. That should not change for MAST unless there is some sort of accommodation that would disrupt that learning environment. So with MAST, like I said, we are trying to keep it as close as possible to what a student experiencing on their daily basis. So if they're taking tests with their peers, on a regular basis, they should be testing with their peers with MAST as well. The kite practice test, this is found on the MAST portal. You can go in and you could take this yourselves if you would like to. The practice test is not in the secure browser. So if you try to enter this in the secure browser, you won't be able to get in. But like I said, I will make sure that MAST portal will be available when I send these sites out. When you go in, students can see what it looks like. And so you will see there's a ton of universal tools here. As a former sixth grade teacher, I know that if the first time a student sees all of these tools is on test day, we're going to be spending the first 20 minutes figuring out 200 different ways to change our screen color, our screen magnification, any of those things. So really making sure that students have the availability to go in here, mess around, see what they're going to see on test day. Before test day, otherwise you're going to see a lot of different screen colors when you go to take that first testlet. We have that text-to-speech at the bottom for our students who have that set. Really clear navigation bar. One thing that a lot of positive student feedback is they know how many questions are going to be on the testlet as soon as they enter it, what they've answered and what they haven't answered. I know from administering tests in the past, students get really anxious when they don't know when it's going to end. And so as soon as a student enters our testlet, they will know the end point of that. These are fixed form. Other thing on here is any testlet that has a calculator available to them, the calculator will be in the testing portal. There are different calculator usages depending on the complexity of the testlet. So unless a student has a specialized calculator, one of those things that maybe is a larger calculator for that needs that for any of like those OT needs, they should be using the calculator in the platform. Like I said, we use a basic calculator for most of those testlets. Our 8th grade testlet has a little bit more complex. We do not want to have to go in and invalidate tests because a wrong calculator was used. So please, please, please use that calculator that's within that portal. I know that there's a lot of questions that are going to still continue to arise throughout the year and coming up to this first window. And so we have a very robust training plan to make sure that any of those questions are answered. We have our first training today. So we are doing 1-hour trainings on Wednesday afternoons leading up to administration. Today, we're going to be talking about, rostering, entering P&Ps, any of those things. So any of our educators that have questions can come in to those 3:30 to 4:30 meetings. They're also recorded and posted on our OPI assessment YouTube channel and our webpage through the OPI website as well. We'll also have listening sessions from window to window. We did that last year and we received so much feedback that drove change. One thing that's really exciting about MAST is Montana's building it. It is our assessment. We are not in a consortium for it. So if we see changes that need to be made, we are able to make them. And if you had any experience in the pilot last year, you will know that we changed things drastically from window 1 to window 5. Aligning with the needs of our students and the needs of our schools. So we will continue to host those listening sessions and continue to iterate on this assessment to make sure that it is the best possible assessment for our students. We have professional learning, which is more designed towards using those score reports to make sure that we are grounding our instructional choices in the data that's being provided. So you can see the dates on those. We have a ton of online resources. We have some hub courses that are available on MAST, both for test administrators and for system test coordinators. We have our YouTube channel. And then we also have our assessment monthly bulletin you can subscribe to. And then we also have 2 office hours each month, the first Tuesday in the morning and then the third Thursday in the afternoon. Those are open Zoom sessions. I'll get you the link to those Zoom sessions. So if there are any MAST questions or assessment questions in general, you can go ahead and hop on those and speak with an assessment specialist. John's going to send out this slideshow All of these are hyperlinked. These are all of the resources you could potentially need. This MAST portal houses all of these resources. So if you have anything to do with MAST within your school, just go ahead and bookmark that. It has timing documents for a testlet, it has sample score reports, has test administration manuals, any of those things. So like I said, we'll get this out. These are all hyperlinked. We really want to make sure these resources are accessible and available to everyone who needs them. With that, like I said, I know that's a lot of content to cover in 30 minutes. Hopefully some of you have been able to catch some of our other trainings that we've had, the Roadshow, the MAST Summit. But with that, I'll pause for any questions. You can use the chat. I have it pulled up, or if you just want to come off mute and ask, I'll leave this open for a little bit.
Thank you, Cedar. There's one question that came up early on. I think you might have answered it already. The question was that the teacher had asked if a student can't finish it during the testlet session, can they pause and jump into it the next day? Um,
Yep, you absolutely can. So within our, and all the instructions are this in our to this are in our test administration manual. You can pause a test. So like I said, most of these testlets are under 30 minutes, which is really great. So for the large majority of our students, they should be able to finish. But we all know as soon as you start testing, you get that call from the office that, if Johnny has an appointment and needs to leave, or if you have a testlet that's taking longer for students, you can go in at the end of that class period, you can pause it. That pause locks down the testlet, so students can't get in, even if they memorize their username and password and their daily access code. And then when they're ready to test again, you log back in and you resume that test. So absolutely that feature is still available. If you have a test that's paused and a student doesn't come back to it by the end of the window, it's just going to force submit where that student is. So any of the questions that they submitted will be submitted, and then any of the questions they didn't get to will be marked wrong.
And then just kind of an observation comment, the open captioning is not available under accommodations. Was looking for a student that needed it and it's not in that area. The only thing that shows up is American Sign Language, speed to text or speech to text, and so on.
So this was a small adjustment that we just made. Open captioning is now available to all students. So we'll go ahead and we'll move that over to the universal features, but we were just meeting with our vendor yesterday. And any of the videos that we would traditionally toggle on and off open captioning, they just have open captioning. So all students, when they watch a video, they will get that video and that text in the bottom. So good catch on that. Still refining a few things on our end as well.
And then Shara did provide the crosswalk link in the chat for everybody. If that's, and I believe it is also on the OPI webpage under the assessment or the testing tabs.
Yep, absolutely. I see a question about Braille. So our Braille version, right now, we've been working with our vendors to see where we can move more with that digital copy. Our Braille version is a print Braille. So we've been in the process of reaching out to districts. If you have a student in your district who requires Braille, please reach out to us today because we have to get those orders in. So we work with a vendor. Those Braille versions will be shipped directly to your school if you need that. We've reached out to any of our districts who have had a need in the past, but if you have a student who is new to Braille, or a student who has moved into your district who requires Braille, please reach out to the OPI assessment team today so we can get that ordered. For paper copies of the assessment in general, same thing that we had with Smarter Balance. We are a virtually administration test for the most part, unless it's written into your IEP. If you need a paper version of your test, you need to request that through the Montcast application. And then that paper version, it's a digital download that we would send to you and that you would download locally and print locally. So if you need Braille or paper versions of your test, please reach out to us immediately so we can accommodate that for window one. Zoom features are embedded. You can also if you have any sort of like external Zoom software, you can absolutely use that as well. But we do have Zoom that's embedded within the Kite platform as well, and you can see that in the practice test.
I appreciate that you have, oh, there's another question.
So the only accommodations that would invalidate a test are accommodations that are given to a student that they shouldn't have it. So it's really important So like read aloud. So if we have like text to speech, any of those things, if it is written in their IEP or 504, they are entitled to have it. It does not invalidate the assessment at all. Now, if we have a student who has an accommodation provided to them, so if a teacher reads a testlet aloud to a student who doesn't have that within a 504 and IEP plan, that would constitute as an invalidation. So as long as the accommodation aligns to your testing plan, you are good to go. But there is not, we do not score those any differently. If a student has accommodations, it doesn't invalidate the test. If a student needs it, if it's written into their plan, they absolutely are entitled to that, and they are scored the same way that we would score any other assessment.
I appreciate the fact that there's trainings on Wednesdays for everybody. So hopefully people can take advantage of that as needed. And I would recommend maybe sharing that with your teachers within your districts, that schedule. So if they have any questions, they might be able to hop on for those after school hour meetings. So thank you for making those available.
Perfect. With that, if you have any questions at all, here's our OPI assessment help desk. Even if it's, about alternate assessments, any of those things, ACT, feel free to reach out to us. Our team is always willing to help, and that's what we're really here for. We know that any change is hard. A statewide assessment change, I feel like, is particularly hard, but we're really excited about October 14th and the opening of this window and really providing timely and actionable data to our educators and to our students. So with that, I'm going to hop off, have another call, but feel free to reach out at any point if you have questions.
And Cedar, if you can just send that PowerPoint to me, I'll get that out to everybody along with today's recording, the link for the recording today.
Perfect. Sounds good. Will do, John. Thank you, everyone, and have a great school year.
Okay, wrapping, we've got about 15 minutes left, not a whole lot of time. Just want to give opportunity for people to ask any questions that they may have with regards to really anything special ed related or information has been passed along with regards to monitoring and just the special ed process as a whole. Are there any questions out there?
Joan, I'm going to say something real quick. So Danny is out of the office today, and if you have emailed her and gotten an out of office response, my email is incorrect in that. I just put the correct email in the chat. Okay?
Thank you. And if you want to just send your emails to me or any of us that might be on here, if you have other questions for Danny, you can send them to us and we can forward them along, or we might even be able to answer them ourselves um, as we go through this process. Again, I just want to say that the process is evolving. Yesterday we had shared during the conference, we had shared some of the foundational pieces. And those are our building blocks, and getting those things in place and rolled out for everybody. And then as we are actually building this thing overall, there's going to be some things that are going to be changing as opposed to what we might have been proposing at one point. So it is just one of those things that right now we are waiting for feedback from the OSEP people, and they may tell us that we have to change some of the things that we've submitted thus far. And so when we get that information, we'll certainly we'll roll that out to you guys as soon as we're able to. But so far we have submitted 3 areas of the 4, and the 4th one is going to be, I think, this week, maybe next, or for sure next. And then all we can do is wait to hear what OSEP has to say, and hopefully that turnaround time is short-lived. So we'll just keep moving forward and trying to implement things and adjust things as needed. Carla, has asked the question for those of us who could not attend yesterday's. Um, we do have a PowerPoint that we did share that we did have yesterday. I think we could make that available, and I can put that in the link for today's recording as well as um, Cedar's PowerPoint today too. Okay, Carla, I hope that helps. Any questions? Any other questions out there at this point? Feel free to unmute if you would like to. Okay, well then we will pause here. Can you pause the recording, please, Kimber? We will yield our time to everybody. The remaining 10 minutes of today, you can have that back, and please feel free to reach out